In part 2 of this media lecture, Professor Peterson will answer the question, are the media biased? We'll start with that question. Are the media biased?
Well, anyone who doesn't believe there is a liberal or democratic bias in the national media are kidding themselves, says Charlie Cook, who himself is a pretty independent observer. He wants everybody to buy his Cook political report, so he tries to stay as neutral as possible. And in fact, if you look at the data, you can see that journalists are much more likely to be leaning in a democratic direction than is the public as a whole. So it's not the case that the journalists are just a regular sample of public opinion in general. The public opinion, you can see the Republican position is around 50% of all those who identify with the party, whereas journalists are about 70% Democratic.
Are all media biased in the same way, or do they each have their own constituency?
Well, as it turns out, media like to cater to their constituents, and more important than the journalist's own particular biases or preferences is the management's views of what's the best strategy for making money. So the Wall Street Journal, which caters to Wall Street, of course, and the business community more generally, well, they've got a conservative readership. So they're going to have a conservative orientation. And the New York Times has a New York City orientation, and college professors and educators around the country and professional people, which tend to be more liberal, and so the New York Times is going to have a liberal orientation. Fox News has developed an identity as a conservative TV station, and its viewers are 81% conservative in their orientation, according to pollsters. MSNBC is more liberal. It gets 62% of its readers are conservative, or its viewers are conservative. And the Huffington Post, a blog, which is known as a liberal blog, only 30% are conservative. So those are just some examples. They change over time. They're probably even more extreme today than when this particular study was done, because if anything, the media has become more and more focused on a particular segment of the population, because that's the way it can get the most ads, that's the way it can get the most readers, and the competition is pretty ferocious these days. So here's the question: who believes these different organizations? And if you take CNN, which is sort of liberal in its orientation, you can see that the Democrats are much more likely to believe CNN than Republicans are. Republicans being the red bar, Democrats the blue bar. And the same is true for CBS, which has increasingly been identified as liberal-leaning in its broadcasts. And National Public Radio, the same pattern. Local TV news, it's closer. Democrats and Republicans are similar in their evaluations, though Democrats are more likely to believe the local. I guess Republicans are just suspicious, except for Fox News. There it turns around. So Fox News has a strong Republican identity, and that shows up in what people think.
How about late night shows? It's all fun and games, but do their jokes show a consistent bias?
Well, you can decide, but to me, it looks at least in the 2012 campaign, the Obama jokes, well, were they really that funny? I don't know. A CNN poll today said that 46% of viewers who watched thought Obama won and 39% thought Mitt Romney won. So it looks like Obama's strategy of staying awake through this one paid off. Okay. So far for Halloween, sales of Obama masks are 30% higher than the sales of Mitt Romney masks. That makes sense. I mean, what's scarier than 4 more years of this economy? So the jokes are about the economy, not too much on his personality. Whereas for Romney, well, the jokes are got a little more bite to them. Paul Ryan just released his tax returns for the last 2 years, and it turns out that he and his wife had a combined income of over $323,000 last year, to which Mitt Romney said See, I do reach out to poor people. Actually, that's pretty funny. Many voters feel that Mitt Romney is out of touch with real Americans after he tried to make a bet with Rich Perry for $10,000. When asked to comment, Mitt said, "I'm sorry, but that's all I had in my pocket at the time." Not bad. All right, so this is the way one guy sees the media's treatment of the debates. They want a nice, clean fight. Just ponder that for a minute. Okay, so how about radio? Is that biased? Top 7 shows are conservative. 17 of the top 35 are conservative. The top-rated liberal show comes in number 19. Only 5 of the top 35 are liberal. Why is it that liberals don't like to listen to the radio? I don't know. Maybe they all are listening to NPR. But in any case, the people who want to listen to talk radio political shows seem to be all conservatives. We don't, we just, maybe they don't like music. I don't know.
Does the public think the media is biased?
Well, we've already seen some evidence of that. But if you ask public opinion in general, is it highly professional? Are news organizations, generally speaking, highly professional? You can see that public opinion on this matter has declined since 1985. So that's probably because all of these outlets are becoming more and more specialized, catering to their particular constituents. And so the public gets an impression that everybody is pushing a particular line. Getting the facts straight, there's been a decline on the part of the public in the evaluation of the media's ability to get the facts straight, and favoring one side or another, it's up. So we're seeing a tendency for the media to be identified as having a specific audience, that it's zeroing in on a particular group of supporters in order to survive in the intense competition that all the news organizations are undergoing.
As you mentioned, when Walter Cronkite was broadcasting on CBS, everyone watched him, or ABC, or NBC. Is that still true today?
Well, here is the reason why the media is developing a bias, because the nightly network news, which used to get 60% attention, is no longer the dominant force that it once was. It's the percentage of the public that's watching the nightly network news, that's CBS, ABC, NBC, that's dropped from over 60% to close to 30%. And if they're watching television now, they're watching local television news. Of course, they always have been watching local television news, but the relative emphasis is shifted because as the one has gone down, local news has become more important.
Who watches national news today?
Well, there's some people still watching national news, and the advertisers know exactly who they are. If you want to figure out who's watching the nightly news, just look at the products that are being marketed. I don't know if many people watching this lecture are in the need of these products too often.
What does local news cover?
Well, local news is what you get if you turn on your TV station at 6 o'clock at night and you don't want to watch the nightly news, but you want to know something about what's going on out in the world. And you can see that you're going to get 30% of the time a story on crime. The government does get 11%. Disasters are quite popular, but they don't happen too often. I mean, they're very popular, but unfortunately they don't happen very often from the point of view of local news. And then there's a bunch of other stuff out there as well. But you can see how little of it focuses on political news or news about what the government is doing. And here's an example of what WSOC in Charlotte, North Carolina did one day. This is they had a 2-minute story on a murder suspect arrested, 21 seconds on a drive-by shooting, 15 seconds on armed robbery, 2 minutes and 40 seconds on a truck slamming into a Pizza Hut, 31 seconds on a truck slamming into Wendy's, and on and on it goes. So that's local news.
So, what do political scientists mean by narrowcasting?
Well, that's what I've been talking about here. If you put it into a word, which political scientists like to do, you can just say, we have narrowcasting today, not broadcasting. Back in the days of Walter Cronkite, we had broadcasting. Everybody watched Walter Cronkite. They wanted to know what he thought. Today, nobody cares what Walter Cronkite's successors think. They go to their favorite station or their favorite source. So TV is down. Newspapers had a huge bump up after 9/11 in 2001, and it lasted for a bit, but the number of readers is constantly declining. The internet is picking up very, very substantially, and that's as narrow casting as you can get, because everybody can go to their very specific source. And radio chugs along because everybody has to drive in their car, and if they're going to listen to the news on the radio, well, that's a good time to do it. So if you look at young people, you can see these same trends. So they are even less likely to be reading the newspaper, and they're even going to be even more likely to be watching the internet. So if we're looking into the future, we can see that the internet is going to become the way in which many people get their news. And that is about as narrow a casting as you can have, because there's so many options out there. You can get your news from your favorite news source. So we have to expect media bias to intensify. Now, that doesn't mean the media system is biased. It only means that particular outlets are biased. But it does mean that it could lead to a fragmentation of society as everybody gets news in the way they want to hear it, and therefore lead to deeper divisions in the society as a whole.
In sum, how powerful is the media, and how biased is it?
So, in sum, we can say that narrowcasting is increasing the bias in the media, and people may not be listening to the other side of the argument as much as they used to. And we know that the media can shape public opinion through priming and agenda setting, though it's not likely to alter basic values. So media bias is driven somewhat by journalist selection, but mostly by the economics of not only TV advertising, as I have indicated here on the slide, but also by advertising in general, whether it's the internet or radio or any other form. It's just the case that any part of the media has got to appeal to its constituents. And with so many choices out there, the narrowcasting is going to intensify in the years to come. In the next lecture, we'll talk about voting in presidential elections and see to what extent they could be affected by the media.